So for homework, you should have copied down these notes into the square on page 43, and I want to write something down for you really quick. You should have that y equals a f of b x minus c plus d. This is kind of all the transformation you can have. The a thing out front is your vertical stretch or shrink. The b thing is your horizontal stretch or shrink. Your c value is your shift left to right, and your d value is your shift up and down. So now if we break that down and we go through this, a out front right here is your vertical stretch or shrink. If a is greater than 1, well, let's do the absolute value of a is greater than 1, it's going to be a stretch. And then over here I'm going to write if the absolute value of a is bigger than 0 but less than 1, it's going to be a shrink. B is actually opposite. Anything that is inside my green circle that I'm drawing right now, anything that is inside this green circle is backwards. So if it says to subtract, you're really going to add. And if it says to multiply by b, you're really going to divide by b. So if you think about that statement for a second, if b is 2, and instead of multiplying by 2, you need to divide by 2, that means all your values are getting smaller. So this b thing is actually opposite. If the absolute value of b is greater than 1, it's a shrink. And if the absolute value of b is between 0 and 1, then it's a stretch. And I know you're like, oh, this is so confusing. Well, let me unconfuse you the best of my abilities. And don't take offense to this. The things circled in green are girly things. They're X things. Girls have XX chromosomes, and they are backwards. Girls are backwards creatures. So if it's inside with the X stuff, it's backwards. If it says to subtract, you're going to add. If it says to multiply, you're really going to divide. So if you take that thought for a second and you look right here, if b is a fraction, if it says to multiply by a fraction, when you divide by a fraction, you really kind of flip it over and multiply. So if you're dividing by 1/2, it's the same thing as multiplying by 2. So if my b value were a 1/2, you would divide, instead of multiply, you're going to divide by 1/2, which is the same thing as multiplying by 2. So again, remember, anything inside the green circle is a girly thing, and it's backwards. You do the opposite. Things on the outside that are not inside with X, things on the outside that are Y transformations, boys are Ys, boys have XY chromosomes, and boys are very straightforward creatures. If it says to add 2, you're going to move up 2. If it says multiply by 3, you're going to multiply by 3. So back to my explanation. Again, this is backwards. It says the plus, so you're really going to move in the negative direction, C. This one says the minus, so you're really going to move in the positive direction, C. These two things are boy things, so if it says to add 3 or add D, you're going to move up 3, and if it says to subtract 3, you're going to move down 3 units. And the last two down here are reflections. So if the negative's up front, you're making all the y's negative. When you make y negative, you're going to go across the x-axis. And then down here, if you make the x negative, you're going to go across the y-axis. Remember, it's backwards. So if y is negative, go across the x-axis. If x is negative, go across the y-axis. Okay, so now flip the page. We're on page 44, and we're just going to quickly go through these transformations. The first problem says that I want to take the graph that I have right here on the graph. It's called f of x, and I want to do this transformation to it. So this transformation means it's going to be a vertical shift up 2. So I'm going to move this whole graph up 2. So every dot I have, I'm going to move it up 2 units. Excuse my drawing abilities as always, but there's my new graph. Number 2 on page 44 says that we are going to do this transformation, which means it's going to be a horizontal shift. And remember, it's backwards, so it says the minus, so you're really going to go add or move to the right. Horizontal shift, right 2 units. So I'm going to pick up all my dots, and I'm going to move them to the right 2 units. So we're just going to move all of our dots to the right 2 units. This one's a little bit off the graph. Like that. And I apologize, on the next graph, the graph isn't there, so let me just give you the ordered pairs. It's the same picture that we were using for number 1 and number 2, but if you want to write down the ordered pairs really quick so you can have it, so you can draw it for number 3 and number 4, the ordered pairs of the original are negative 7, 8, 0, 0, 6, 6, and 9, 6. So go ahead, take a moment and draw it in really quick. Okay, so I drew it in, and now we're talking about the transformations. Well, so there's 2 transformations here. There's a reflection over the x-axis, or a vertical flip, or vertical reflection, and we're going to stretch all the y values by 2. So we're going to have a vertical reflection over x-axis. And then we have a vertical stretch by 2, which means really we're taking all the y values in this case and we're going to multiply all of our y values by a negative 2. Luckily for us, I just gave you all of these awesome ordered pairs, so we're going to just kind of do a little bit of math. So we're going to take all of our y values, because the 2's on the outside, it's a y thing, and we're going to multiply them all by a negative 2. So in my first ordered pair, negative 7 stays the same, but the 8 is going to become a negative 16. Negative 16. And the next one, 0 times anything, is just going to be 0. And then my 6 right here is going to become a negative 12. And then my 6 right here is going to become a negative 12. So we're going to go ahead and draw it. Go ahead and pause the video and do it yourself. So you should have got something like my green graph. It should have been reflected across the x-axis and stretched out. So that's what it looks like. Now we're going to go to number 4. And before we start number 4, make sure you draw in the original picture. Use these black ordered pairs that I just gave you. Okay, so I drew my original in, and I want to write down the equation really quick. What they want me to do in this problem is they want me to do y, oops, I need my pen to do this. Y equals 3f of x plus 1 minus 4. So my best bet for you, or my recommendation for you, is that we are actually going to draw a table. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw my little table. And I'm going to do x's, y's. Okay, so here's what's going to happen is first I'm going to put all my x values in of my original. And then I'm going to put all my y values in of my original. So I'm just going to write my order pairs. Negative 7, 8, 0, 0, 6, 6, and then I'm going to have 9, 6. Okay, so let me zoom out really quick so we can fill in this table and have space. But what's going to happen is we're going to go piece by piece. So if you look at the x stuff, which is right here, there's only one thing that happens. And that plus 1 is going to make everything in the x direction move to the left one, which is subtracting 1. So you're going to end up getting negative 8, negative 1, 5, and 8. And I'm actually going to circle this column because those are the x values that I'm going to end up using. 2 things happen to the y stuff, a multiply by 3 and a minus 4. We still have to follow PEMDAS, so we first need to multiply. So I'm going to multiply by 3 and get 24, 0, 18, 18, and then I'm going to subtract my 4 and get 20, and this is going to be really far off my graph, I apologize. 20, negative 4, 12, and 12. And so I'm going to use red to draw my final graph. Oh, hang on, before I use my red, I want to circle this y column because those are my finals. And if you're asking yourself, how do I show work for this on a test? Well, this is exactly how you show your work. So now I'm just going to graph it. I'm going to do negative 8, 20. So negative 8 way up in space here is going to be my 20. And actually, if I zoomed out a little bit more, probably more like way up there. And then I'm going to have negative 1, negative 4, negative 1, -4. Then I'm going to have 5, 12, and 8, 12. So my graph got super, super skinny, stretched out, and again, I apologize, my drawing abilities are very subpar, but something of that nature should be what your graph looks like. So the next problem on page 45 wants you to list the transformation and find the domain and range. So first things first, it's written on my function that you guys have. So you guys have f of x equals 3 x minus 2 plus 1. So I'm just going to go through and list my transformations one at a time. So this first transformation is going to be a vertical stretch by 3. This is going to move it to the right 2 units. And this is going to move it up 1 unit. And if you think about this is a parabola, it's an absolute value. And so I can do my domain and range without drawing the graph, and so I'm going to do them very quickly, but then we'll verify when we do the graph. Again, it's an absolute value. There's no restrictions on what you can plug in, so your domain on an absolute value is -infinity to infinity. Your range normally for absolute value, if you think about it, it's a V and it starts at 0, 0, but my V in this case is going to go right 2 and up 1, so I'm going to move it up, over, and up, and there's going to be where my new V is. So my range in this case is going to be a little bit different. My range is going to start at 1, and it's going to go to infinity, because I moved it up 1, and so it's not going to go to 0 or anything like that. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing I did on the previous problem, and I'm going to make a table. And since it's an absolute value, I'm just going to pick a couple points to plug in. So I'm going to do, let's do -2, 0, and 2. And normally, when you do these values on an absolute value, if you did the absolute value of 2, you would get 2, absolute value of 0 is 0, and absolute value of 2 is 2. And now we have to apply our transformations. So according to our transformations, the x stuff is going to get a +2. We're going to move to the right 2, so I'm going to get 0, 2, and 4. And then my y stuff, I have to first multiply by 3. So you're going to get 6, 0, 6. And then you're also going to have to add 1. So +1, so you're going to get 7, 1, 7. So if I go ahead and graph what I have, I'm going to be at 0, 7, 2, 1, and at 4, 7. So I have a super skinny V like that. And if you look at that, my domain is definitely -infinity to infinity, and my range is, I drew that in the wrong place, over 2 up 1. Sorry, my V should have done that. My range is definitely 1 to infinity. So go ahead and pause the video, and I'm going to do the last problem on page 45, and I want you to come back and check that you have the right answer. So when you come back to the video, there'll be a table and a graph and a domain and a range. And you're probably have to press play, and there'll be 2 slides that you'll have to play the first slide, and then it'll go to the next slide for you. Okay, so first thing is I drew this way too long. This +2 is not under the square root. So let me just scratch it off and write it one more time. Actually, it's nooch. F of x equals the square root of 3 minus x plus 2. This problem is super tricky, and it's super tricky because of this right here. You are used to seeing x plus or minus something. You need to rewrite this, because if you don't, I promise you, you will make a mistake. So I'm going to rewrite this. The negative goes with the x, plus 3 plus 2, and then we need to rewrite it one more time. And the reason is very simple. Watch when I rewrite this piece right here. I'm going to pull out my -1, x minus 3 plus 2. This is what you want to see. And that's because if you had not done this, I'm willing to bet one of a couple things would have happened. One, you would have shifted the wrong way, or you would have forgot to reflect it right here. So now that we have our appropriate equation, we can do our work. Okay, so all I did was quickly make a table, and I only put things in my table that I knew how to square root. Square root of 0 is 0, square root of 1 is 1, square root of 4 is 2. And I'm just using my basic parent functions. And then we'll take care of this negative first. So we need to divide all of our x values by negative. Remember, it's on the inside with the girly stuff, so instead of saying multiply, we really need to divide. So I'm going to divide everything by -1. You're going to get 0, -1, -4, and then you need to do this right here, which is really adding 3. So 3, 2, -1. These are x values that we're going to use. The only y thing we have to do right here is add 2. So 2, 3, 4. Those are our y values. And if I go ahead and graph what I had 3, 2, and then I had 2, 3, and I had -1. I'm definitely off. Okay, let me do some blue instead. I had 3, 2, and I had 2, 3, and then I had -1, 4. So if I draw this, I've made extra big dots so I make sure I don't miss these. My graph should look something like that. Now if I want to go back and write the domain and the range, domain, range, if you look at this, it actually starts at 3 and gets smaller. So my domain here is, oops, I wrote that backwards, -infinity, and the biggest thing I can be is 3, but I can touch 3, so I get a bracket. And then my range, well, my range is actually getting bigger, so I'm going to start at 2 with a bracket, and I'm going to go to infinity. Okay, so now you need to go back to Edmodo, and there's one more video to help you with page 46, and then you need to do pages 47 and 48 without a calculator, and those are due on Monday. You need to show a table, you need to show work, make sure that you are going to get credit for doing all the hard work on your homework.